I really appreciate everyone being here today. Here we go. My name's Ed Bailey. I work as the technical evangelist for a startup called Cribble. Just to give with a little bit about my background, I've been working in financial services for 20 plus years, working in strategic engagements with business leaders across a number of organizations. And so I wanted to share today some of that experience, what we're seeing in the past and also what we're seeing in the future in terms of how do you justify investments in cybersecurity anymore? The landscape is rapidly changing, and that security leaders have to adjust their mindset, how they're addressing these challenges with business leaders. I was one of Cribble's first customers back in 2018, and I recently joined Cribble. It's been interesting. I've never been a vendor before, so it's kind of a little weird being on the other side of the table, but I've been enjoying it. It's always fun, and just the best part of my day are being able to work with the teams that work for people in this room. It's been incredible. So a little bit of the agenda. We're going to start probably a little bit of pragmatic, what I would call a little bit of a negative, a little bit of a downer. We're going to start talking about a couple of common case studies, and then we'll also talk about what do you do. And I think the really thing to take away from what I have to say about cyber insurance. Cyber insurance and the business continuity insurance landscape is about to dramatically change. So I think it's something that's something we spend a lot of time on. And also just if anyone has questions or comments, please don't wait till the end. The best opinions, most knowledgeable people are not mine, they're yours. And so just please feel free to share. And then talk about how to move forward and be comfortable with what you're doing. So the idea of cybersecurity at the end of the day is a business decision. Too often, it's a struggle because the idea is, as a defender, you feel like a moral obligation. You have to stop the bad guys. But sometimes when you're dealing with your business leaders, the cost of stopping the bad guys may not be worth it. So we have to understand, when do we need and when is it justified to spend money and staff and to have that high quality defense, and when is just checking the box and something that's just good enough. Those are things to think about, and also then be able to justify, be able to articulate why, be able to articulate the what. And this is the hard part. Ways I've been in too many board meetings, too many investment meetings, where the traditional models of justifying investment are starting to break down. Too often I see leaders overusing the R word when I talk about risk to the business, risk to this, risk to that, without being able to quantify the hard dollar value of what we're doing. I never forget recently being at a board meeting and the CISO was giving a presentation and was listing we were stopping something like 257,000 attacks a day, when it really traces back to how many denies are coming through the firewall. And this is something that board members are getting to be wise about. And the threat landscape's not the same for every business. If you're an online retailer and your business is driven by being able to be online and serve your customers quickly, versus a manufacturing entity, versus energy, versus someone who's really doesn't even have a presence on the internet, everything's a little bit different. And that's why it's very important to understand your business, understand your business's tolerance for risk, and being able to articulate that. And this is something, not kidding. Being a CISO these days is an incredibly hard job. I feel for leaders who are trying desperately to do the right thing. They're trying to protect their customers' information. They're trying to protect their infrastructure. They know what can happen. And this is why we're gonna just focus on how do we talk about this and how to be okay with it going forward. Talk about a first case study. I was intimately involved in this situation in 2017. Large financial services provider was absolutely and utterly breached. The files, and something like 200 million Americans, something about probably 15 million Canadians, 30 million in the EU, all were just completely stolen. Absolute negligence. This particular company, it was just not even trying. The data was gone. And didn't notice what was happening for some time. There was even insiders were selling their stock because they knew what happened before it got out. I worked in an adjacent business, and we were just 24/7 for about 6 months trying to deal with the fallout of this incident. We were sure that this was a business-ending event. The idea that you've broken the trust with your customers, that you've not even tried, that there's going to be lawsuits, there's going to be massive fines, executives are going to jail. because we were just, everyone they were dealing with in the industry was very, very upset about what was going on. Stock went down by 30% overnight. Had, there was investigations, had the CEO and various had to testify in front of the US Congress. Regulators had massive fines. And so it was illuminating that you look at 1 year later, the stock prices had recovered. The revenue within 18 months had almost recovered. Consumers didn't go anywhere. There was very large fines, but then this same business turned this around as a way into the street in order to understand, here, we're gonna finance revitalizing our entire business based upon this event. And turn it almost into a positive. And this is the thing I think that business leaders started to figure out was, we have this what we thought was a business-ending event, but it wasn't that big of a deal. We survived. The reasons why people got in real trouble and fired was because of unethical and insider trading, not because they were completely and utterly negligent with their cybersecurity. The fines were large, the fines were material, but this is the role that insurance played. And this is something I'll say again and again, too many times, insurance plays a large role in mitigating these kind of catastrophes. And this is where, and this is, I think, a critical piece that's gonna change. And this is just, nothing changed. What we thought was a business-ending event was, it was okay. We saw this again with the incident with Target earlier than this. We see this over and over again. Consumers are, it's another day in Y. It's another day that ends in Y when you get a notice from some company that your data has been compromised. This is another case study, energy provider, ransomware. They shut down, even though it was their business systems, they shut down their entire pipeline system. Large chunk of the East Coast of the United States had no gas for about a week. This is the same thing I had to deal with, that we were sitting at home because we had no gas. Local infrastructure, local government, state government was just very concerned that there was, what are we gonna do if we run out of gas and get this the recovery? There was some, the CEO had to testify in front of Congress, but there was no fines, no one went to jail. There was just nothing again. There was some minor regulations that were by the infrastructure regulators in the United States, but life went on. I do admire how Canada, I think, has a much more of a plan to deal with critical infrastructure. I think this is something that's very underrated. But again, think of it yourself as, I'm running a business and I'm gonna spend money, and that we're gonna pay off the hackers, the government got the money back anyway, and my insurance paid for all this. So, why do I care? And that's why I just talk about this idea that it's just Department of General Indifference. That this is the kind of thing you have to face of, how do you deal with this? Your major impact to the consumers, but minimal impact to the company. So the lessons learned. Big events can pass quickly. Consumers just are indifferent. I think that people are comfortable with the idea that my information's out there. I think there's a significant lack of understanding of how that information is used, how that information is used literally against consumers. But again, without major, without issues around brand loyalty, and also this also goes back to competition. What are you going to do? And this is where what it does start to matter. Regulators are really starting to pay attention. So regulators are increasing their interest, increasing their fines, increasing their regulatory scrutiny. There was some effort, especially in the infrastructure area as well, to, all right, we're going to start putting more regulations on pipeline providers, and also power providers, water providers, but the lobbyists push back, and again, it's just almost, I wouldn't say anything really changed. In Canada, I think you've had a decent amount of regulation, a decent amount of oversight, and I think there's more responsibility there. But in the rest of the world, I don't think that's the case. And then finally, insurance is going to be another important consideration, and we'll address that a little bit later. And so this is why regulators are on alert. It's important to understand who your regulators are, where you do business. Got brought into another engagement where a company didn't quite understand, at least the security part of the company didn't quite understand that they did business in the EU. And so they had a GDPR fine, significant GDPR fine, and we were working with them, and they're like, "What do you mean?" They're disconnect between the business and because they didn't have a GRC function. And this is something that I think is really underrated because certain places, like the EU, for example, they're very, very tough about this. They will drop fines on you like you would not believe. Barclays just had a massive outage during tax day in the EU and actually in the UK, and there's a regulation called DORA, which requires highly resilient cybersecurity. And this, I think that there's going to be significant fines on Barclays for having this because the DORA regulations now apply. And I'm interested to see, does this compel Barclays to start paying attention? And this is something you're seeing rise around the world. Brazil and India are starting to get very interested in regulating data breaches, regulating their banks. And so I'm curious to see how this rise. This is something when I was working in financial services, we started to see in South America, it was really, Colombia, for example, became just a paragon of virtue of how they were managing the data of their citizens. And that if you violated their expectations, it came down like a house of bricks. Brazil started to, but it's still, the politics there are uncertain. But I'm just interested in the global rise of basically caring. Canada's always been really good about this, but again, coming back to the United States, it's just uncertain how that works. And this is where there's a lot of uncertainty as well, because with the change in the administration, regulatory is going to be uneven at best. And so this is going to give another uncertainty. Everyone wants rules. I mean, when I work in this business, I want to understand what are my rules, what am I going to do, what are my expectations. And this is why I think it's incredibly important to have an understanding of who your regulators are, what is your risk, because you're going to have to describe this to your business. You don't want to get caught short like the company I was just mentioning. And understand, and just that way you can have a scope and understanding, because you can use this information to support investment. And this is where cyber insurance has been interesting. Cyber insurance was an easy cash cow for quite some time. This worked from working in the insurance industry. The idea that companies are digitizing very rapidly. The statistics are really interesting. You're going back about 15 years. We're seeing a steady rise. And of course, it's always first who you think about is on the internet, online retailers. But now it's starting to be industrials, starting to be in manufacturing. I remember we had an engagement with a manufacturing company, and we had one of the board members, an elderly, very distinguished gentleman. It's like, what do you mean? My manufacturing gear is not on the internet. We had to explain basically what you want to bet. Your CNC gear is run by computers. Everything in your business is run by computers, and they have a massive amount of risk that will shut down your manufacturing overnight if you don't have a certain amount of controls in place. Again, this is a mismatch in expectations from the business leaders. It's an education issue. And this is also where I think cyber insurance has a role, that there's this idea, my cyber insurance will pay for it. And over time, your cyber insurers have failed to understand the risk, and they have failed to be able to price the risk. The risk has been criminally underpriced until the past couple of years. And with these massive payouts coming out, you're starting to see a very uneven approach of, okay, rates are going to rise. We still don't understand what's going on. Spent quite a bit of time working where we'll get invited to work with a framework of an insurance company. Like we were listening that they were just asking questions. Basically, it was just, we're going to ask some questions. The cybersecurity, the GRC team is going to answer it. It really wasn't an attestation. There was a large questionnaire, but there really wasn't any evidence of, are we doing the right thing? And the thing that's bothered me the most about the process with insurance companies is it's incredibly irregular. Nothing is uniform about it. But still, cost is going up. Business continuity, and this is where there's a kind of bright line, starting to see riders and business continuity insurance that's excluding digital events. Or they're going to try to sell some sort of insurance for what they call digital events, because they find the digital events to be more common and more expensive than, say, storm or some sort of act of God or something like that. So it's just been confusing, and especially on the security side of the business, because sometimes this is the realm of the CFO, not the CISO. Someone's paying on the other side of the event, you don't have involvement, you're not really asked, you're not really engaged. And so, but the reason why I bring this up is it helps have that conversation with your business of how we can impact the business in a very positive and a very material way. We just recently worked with one of my favorite companies, global industrial. They manufacture various appliances, and we helped them with this story of how do we standardize, help the insurer understand the risk, and we were able to help them cut their premiums by about 20%. And that was the idea that was kind of amusing, because we helped them save a couple $100,000 on Splunk. They were able to save $2 million on their insurance. And so that's the kind of thing that really got their business interested. And this is where the future, there we go. So, and this is where I think the future of cyber insurance, we recently started to have conversations with some of the risk advisors. If you know what risk advisors are, is for larger companies, they go to risk advisor services who then shop their insurance over to the large carriers with the idea that these large carriers don't have the expertise to understand risk and price it appropriately. And the thing that was interesting is about both of these advisories contacted us and started looking for our opinions, that they're looking for the same thing at the same time. The quote from one of the gentlemen who I was especially surprised at, he says, I was here 30 years ago, we started to standardize on building, on construction. Or the idea that if you're using this kind of steel, this kind of concrete, and this kind of roofing, we're going to give you a set of discounts. Because we understand the risk, you're doing what you're doing. And that makes sense. Buildings, we've been building buildings for a long time. There's an understanding across business, insurance of what is risk. If you're using poor concrete, this concrete, you understand it. They're now finally starting to understand the idea of common frameworks to understand cybersecurity risk. So we started working with them. The idea to develop a set of common controls around the NIST Common Cybersecurity Framework, 12 common controls, and the idea that here are things you're not only going to ask to attestation, but you're going to ask for evidence of. And one of the things I was really impressed by, one of the advisories is going to start asking for a tap into the data feed to understand, is data being collected? Is data being standardized? In order to understand, it's like there's check the box security and then there's actual security. And if we can see that you're collecting the right data and having an actual security program, we're going to give you substantial discounts because they understand that you're doing the right thing. I think a good analogy is the idea that if you're going to build a house on the coast, do you build a house at sea level, or are you going to build a house behind a seawall where you're going to mitigate and also raise the level of your house by, say, 6 feet? The idea that I'm going to insure you and give you a reasonable rate because you have done things to mitigate foreseeable damage. And I think that's something that's going to come up. I think it's going to hit businesses like a tidal wave because too many companies have adopted the whole check-the-box security model. And that check-the-box security model is not going to work anymore, not if you want reasonable cyber insurance. And this is also going to expand to business continuity assurance as well. So this is important. I mean, this is probably the most interesting thing that I've seen in the past few years in terms of the business of cybersecurity. Just and comments or anything, because I think that standardization in the insurance company is something the insurance industry is going to be something that everyone needs to be aware of. Oh, please.
So when you're talking about insurance, cyber insurance company will soon would require an audit. What kind of an audit would that be? Would it be like based on which framework?
Well, and that's going to be the challenge is which framework. So the ones I recommended because it was just a generic framework was the NIST cybersecurity framework. But there are several others. But the idea is to have a common set of standards for everyone to play with. And that's what I beg them is like, please, just pick one and stick with it. But I think also the difference is it's not going to be getting a 100-page questionnaire in the mail. It's going to be someone like me showing up and saying, show me your SIM, show me your data, show me what you're doing, show me how you do IR, who is building your detections, who's running your SOC, do you even have a SOC? And I think that's going to be a big difference.
So they would probably send their own auditor or rely on the audit, proof of the audit you provide back to them?
Well, and that's why, and this is something is that attestation is not going to work anymore. That for certain cyber insurance, you're going to have people like me showing up, asking a lot of questions, who've actually been through this. Please.
You're spot on with it.
Yep.
It's now approaching the standard of what we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
We're now seeing the same standard that we've seen with PCI.
Yeah.
Right? Before it was, do you do this? And you can sign something in crayon or not. And then go, yeah, sure, you do that. But now it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've got to take it to that next level. And
right.
That's what the security questionnaires are driving. That's what everything else is driving.
Yep. And this is especially, I think, for the tech companies are going to be okay with this. They're going to have the expertise. It's everyone in the middle and the bottom who's going to struggle. And that's where I think it's important as we start to understand the economics that if good enough insurance is going to be good enough, how are you going to backstop that? And then we're going to talk about cyber resiliency in a minute. Because I think this is where I think a strong cyber resiliency practice is going to be able to drive managing your security risk, but also your insurance premiums as well. And by the way, if you're especially in front of a board member, it's always business continuity, it's never resilience. Guys, please.
Yeah, it's also looking at the third party, because as we're starting to see, there's more and more third parties that are being affected by this. And so when you get insurance, I'm sure a lot more insurance companies are going to say, okay, what's your third party program look like?
Yeah.
Because in the end, you're the one that holds the data.
Yeah.
You're the one responsible. But it's that third party that let them in. You may have a pristine program in place. That's the biggest concern that I see happening right now.
Absolutely, and this is something that's just devastating. Where we sat down, companies like, yeah, we're just starting a program to understand the risk of our SaaS providers. Like, so how many SaaS providers do you think we have? And we're like, we maybe think like 6 or 7. And I was like, times that by about 10, dude. Because I mean, this is, and your data is in third-party systems, and you don't know it. Every one of those is a potential set of risk, especially, I mean, you know, I wouldn't say Salesforce because they do a pretty good job, but if you're using some third party for your CRM, for example, there's a significant amount of the value of your company is sitting in another provider. And that your controller of that data, your understanding of the security of that data, this is a significant risk. And I think thank you for bringing that up because, and this is something for all the SaaS companies out there that are all, you know, we'll help you manage your GRC program and everything. And so I'm waiting for them to start adding a tab of help us manage your insurance as well. Please.
All these small and medium-sized companies deal with this impending doom of cyber insurance becoming so expensive, so complicated. So it just takes away from their actual practice when the company doesn't have the manpower to do that.
Yeah, and this is, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think it's a huge issue. This is where we're seeing managed service providers step into the breach because, I mean, we're looking at, you know, what I would consider medium, but to me, I'm still new to this, but someone who's like $4 to $5 billion in revenue is considered a medium-sized company, but cannot afford to staff a SOC. And then this is where we're going to talk about this in a couple slides, was how to address that. How to put yourself in the best position of where you put your limited investment. Because you're right, it's the biggest targets out there, community banks, are enormously at risk. You got the one guy who's 12 other jobs who's also your cybersecurity person. And then this is where mitigation, and we're talking about this, mitigation is incredibly important. So we'll just kind of walk through the decision tree of investment versus value versus risk. Talk about some common questions. I'm going to ask some questions. Please, just things that thought-provoking things to think about. I'm going to suggest a couple of ideas, and then we'll finally finish up with addressing. I don't have the kind of funding. Where do I invest what I have? What do I do? How do I move forward? So, and this is the first thing: is your business highly regulated? If your business is highly regulated, and then you can come to your business and say, if we don't do this, we're going to get fined this. That does help make a very straightforward argument to your business. You know, we violate GDPR, we can get fined 3% of our global revenue, and they will do it in a heartbeat, and you know that will happen. You know, previously with the United States, the SEC, violate SEC regs, you're going to be potentially subject to tens of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fines. That's, you know, not sure what's going to happen there, but we'll see. Canada's financial authority has been fairly aggressive, which I really appreciate. Countries, you know, I mentioned Brazil, India, will rapidly fine companies who and you can have evidence of this. I've got to see one deck where they literally printed out the latest set of fines around the world for these sort of things, especially around data protection. To make it clear, draw a clear line from, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. So this is the easy button, but not everyone's regulated. I mentioned the energy provider. There had some light regulation, but not really. Privately held company, so the SEC, for example, doesn't apply. A lot of the other things don't. The normal backstops and checks do not apply. And this is where it's important, as if you're running this kind of company, and we'll address that shortly. And also risk the business if you breach. You see this with online retailers. The manufacturer that I mentioned kind of ignored what we recommended, and they came back and they've been ransomwared. Their main manufacturing plant was down for about 30 days. So that's where we got to talk to them about what was the cost of you of not being able to manufacture. All your CNC machines are down for 30 days, you know, while they're unwinding this breach. What does this cost you? How do you do it? Here's how we can help you mitigate this in the future. And these are the, but just, it's important. This is something that when I work with, some of my peers, some of the people I advise, is the idea of you have to do the best you can, you give the best advice you can. Sometimes you have to accept that the business doesn't care. And this is just, unfortunately, is part of it. And it's just because everyone, I mean, so many people get in this business. You're in the military, have a, we've got to stop the bad guys. And sometimes you just can't. So you have to be, and you have to put your best foot forward, but you can't let it eat at you. Because believe me, I've been there for a long time, and it's a real struggle. It's something that you just have to, you can only do what you can do. But the people who are the business leaders, they fund these things, and they're going to understand, and they're going to have to eat the consequences of their decision, even though sometimes that doesn't seem to happen. And then also, at high quality cybersecurity, add business value. There's some companies that we work with where having high quality cybersecurity allows them to do business with other companies more. This is something we see especially with the very large banks. They will connect their networks and be more free of how they exchange information because you have a highly auditable, compliant program that does a good job. So if you're a company that's medium size, you're looking to break into information services, so not necessarily financial service, information services, if you can show this ability to guard information, manage information, then these companies will connect with you. So it can be a business enabler, but you have to be in the right space. Because not everyone cares. But we've had really good luck working with these companies because they were able to see significant growth in their revenue because, hey, we can do business with the big boys. They'll do business with us. We can have a good business relationship, but they will not do business with people who they cannot trust. And that's just, those are the kind of things where to look at it. If you're not in that space, then it's a different type of calculus. But it's just something to consider as you're having that conversation with your business when you talk about investment. And then finally, where is check the box good enough? Where is check the box good enough? The idea that we're going to have largely a GRC program. Our actual security engineering is completely outsourced at MSSP. We are going to accept lowest dollar. And that's a lot of that comes where you're going to understand what your business considers its risk. And of course, that's the thing is, the famous, sometimes you F around and find out where you got that wrong. This is where it's important to try to help understand, at least ask those questions. I'll never forget, again, going back to the gentleman we talked about, the manufacturing company, just did not understand how connected even this manufacturing company was. And this is where you got to give that advice, do this where you can, and then move on with it. And this is, unfortunately, it is what it is. So this is what I do next. And this is where the idea, this is go back to your question, especially in small and medium businesses, even $3 to $5 billion of revenue, you're still a medium-sized business. And this is where I think it's critical. And I say this as a vendor, but I say this, invest in your people. I would prefer you spend money on your talent, your people, than buy tools. So talk about hygiene. The biggest single issue I see is the flat networks. I'm just horrified how often when you see, for example, you see a small compromise through a VPN and that person is able to reach the entire network. That is because there's just no hygiene. Putting in segmentation in network is not necessarily, it's a time investment, but it's not necessarily where you're going out and buying the most fanciest EDR. EDR tool is not going to stop bad network hygiene. And so I think this is really critical to focus on hygiene, focus on your people, focus on your talent. This is where also leveraging high quality MSSPs can be a really good way of supplementing your talent so that you have the expertise you need. You can have it at an affordable price. It can be when you need it, and it gives you a set of options. Tools are not going to solve these kind of problems. And this is also where it's important to start building cyber resiliency into your business model. And the idea to always ask yourself, the whole thing of what if this happens, how do we recover? Can we recover? How long will it take to recover? And this is also, when you talk to your business leaders, call it business continuity, don't call it cyber resilience. They're going to understand business continuity. The idea that, like then we had it when we inevitably came back to the same manufacturing company, had another engagement, we're able to talk about, here are the things that you can do in order to get back on your feet faster. You're not going to be able to stop everything, and especially you mentioned the small and medium risk model, but you can recover. And this, when you go back to your insurance company, you can show them a model of verified recovery of we can restore. If we get, this part of the network gets ransomware, the rest of it won't get ransomware. Our manufacturing, like our CNC machines, they're in an air-gap network, an actual air-gap network that we can verify because we have this MSSP who's going to attest to it and show it to you. And then that way they can see you've done what's reasonable. And this is, I was mentioning, we were able to get 20% cut off their cyber insurance premium. That was a big deal. And then once the CFO sees that cyber insurance premium go down by $2 million, they start to pay attention to what security says, start to trust what security says. I hope that this brings alignment with the business. So this is the thing, it's just, it's your people. Invest in your talent, invest in hygiene. And finally, and then this is where to plan. Know your failure modes. As we mentioned, keep working on that over and over again. It's important to practice. Build partnerships with the business continuity. Every part of your business where it has a regular practice of, okay, this is gonna fail, here's what we do. You don't want to try to figure it out in the middle of an incident. Having standard playbooks, and this is something that doesn't cost vast amounts of money. You're not spending vast amounts of money on some vendor to deliver software to go through these models. Planning, hygiene, understanding your failure modes, and then I think you can put yourself in a better place. And finally, just bringing it all together. Sorry, cybersecurity is a tough business. It's getting tougher. The demands on security leaders, especially CISOs, are not going away. It's important to be realistic. It's important to align yourself with the business. Incredibly important to coach your teams, especially don't underestimate the emotional toll when you're starting to work with having to compromise what you consider your best security. And because a lot of times we don't like to talk about these things, but it helps give your people know that you support them, you understand them. This is part of what the business is, and so that we move forward and accept it. Thank you very much. Any questions, please? Please.
Are you hearing from the insurance companies, from what I see, they're looking at the process and what's being put in place, but does that include, in the protection of people, the training that people are undergoing that goes outside of their SOC teams and their IT people, but the people who are logging in at Starbucks, right?
Right.
Which cause a real risk to the organization. Is that something that the insurance companies are?
Yeah, so for example, if you have SOC 2, if you're certified for SOC 2, those are the kind of things that really help. That's building a framework of mitigation of not just your security program, but not just your cybersecurity program, but in general, are your users going to try not to click on every link that comes through their email? And so and the idea, a best effort try. And so you're exactly right. Please.
More of a comment than a question. So I'm finding that the IT people with my insurance companies that I work with almost are driving, they're almost the teachers now. Instead of the IT department teaching the business what to do, it's the insurance company IT people telling my client IT people what to do, which I find a really interesting switch than maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Right, and to me, I think that's great. It's just the idea of just partnership, that we're going to help set the standard. Because the thing is, if the government's not going to set the standard, then I think your insurance company will set that baseline behavior. And few things change behavior like insurance companies. Please.
So how are you going about quantifying risk? You started today's conversation saying, we went to a board meeting and the CISO was actually talking a lot of technical controls and technical attacks and things of that nature. So how are you quantifying that?
Well, and this is where I start with the idea, what is the risk of the business? So first off, start with your regulators. That's going to be the easiest. You don't do this, we're going to get fined this. What are we going to do to not do this? And this is where I also talk about the idea of, play the what if scenario of, if our core business is down, how much is this going to cost us? And this is where you go through the ransomware attack. And then give it examples in the business, and then relay that back to cost of not only cyber insurance, but also your business continuity insurance. The idea that that's going to clean it all up. We just got involved. This is another engagement where, it was bad. There was probably in full terms, there was about $100 million insurance payout for this particular disaster. And there was significant reviews, and for example, their insurance carrier said, sorry, we're done with you. And that the idea is now their insurance, their cyber insurance is 2.5x what it was before. And so these are the things that we tie into. And the reason why I try to frame it in this way is these are the kind of things business leaders are going to understand. I mean, does that make sense at all? Because, I mean, please, if it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I was just curious to see if you already tie into the cost of the data breach, for example. You have some data, you have this amount of data, and if that gets breached, that is
Right. Right, and that's the regulatory analysis. Because unfortunately, the economic loss of that data is unfortunately just not really there. You see that, you mentioned before the first case study, there's lost data on a couple hundred million people and nothing. And the idea is if it wasn't for the regulators stepping in, the consumers didn't stay away. And this is something to see with Target years ago. Consumers didn't stay away. And so I just find with business leaders, that's just not an effective argument anymore. Please.
So the other thing to keep in mind as well that's been happening the last couple of years is cyber insurance carriers are refusing to pay.
Exactly.
So you find out that you answered a question on the questionnaire wrong,
Yep.
or you didn't have necessarily the protections or things that you had in place. They will backdate, cancel your policy, and you will not get any
Exactly.
funds to recover your business or to mitigate.
Yeah, one thing we're seeing especially is as a company engages someone like a third-party provider like Mandiant, insurance carriers are engaging. There's a couple of third-party incident responders who manage the insurance policy claims who step in, and they're looking over the shoulder for exactly that reason. Please, sir.
I think one of the interesting things is that the onus is upon yourself. This is more of a comment. The onus is more upon yourself to prove that you had those controls in place at the time of the breach. And I can tell you that that's not an easy endeavor, right?
Nope.
That's assuming that you've got the breadcrumbs to show it. And
Right.
many organizations, that's why those self-assessments, I would advise anybody who's leading the security function in an organization, do not let it be diluted,
Yes.
right? Because that's a true representation, and will also you get out of jail free card as well.
Exactly. And this is where, even if it's only a couple of people or a SaaS provider, that the idea that by having that evidence, for example, not only does it help you with your SOC 2 attestations and everything, but it also helps you with being able to do exactly what you're talking about and being able to communicate to your insurance provider, we did everything that we could reasonably do and that you should pay out. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the great questions. Thank you.